It was Father's Day, and I hadn't felt this kind of sting in decades. I glanced at my phone again. Emily's message was blunt. Family only. Stay away. I felt my chest tighten, the words slicing through me sharper than a winter wind over Lake Coeur d'Alene. I remembered the countless mornings I'd made her hot chocolate, the late nights I stayed up helping her with algebra, the weekends I spent fixing her bike until my hands ached. Emily, why? I whispered into the quiet living room, hoping someone would answer. Silence. Then a faint, barely audible, "Dad, just trust me." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My heart pounded as I put on my coat and walked toward the driveway, noticing the spring sunlight bouncing off the lake, mocking my helplessness. Ryan was already in his truck, smirking as he waved at me. "Morning, Mr. Hayes. Heard about your plans today," he said, his tone casual but calculated. I nodded, saying nothing, my jaw tight. My daughter stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes cold. "You're not really needed here anymore," she muttered, her voice carrying that strange mixture of defiance and guilt. "Emily, this is your father," I said, trying to anchor her to some remnant of reason. She didn't flinch. I felt every memory of laughter, every holiday, every birthday gone in an instant, replaced by this sharp divide. I gripped the keys, feeling the weight of the day on my shoulders, the weight of decades of love being dismissed in a few curt sentences. I paused, listening to the faint creak of the screen door behind me, and thought of the house we'd all shared, the gatherings, the dinners, the countless hours I'd poured into making it a home. "Go ahead, Dad," Emily said, almost sneering now. "We'll manage without you." I started the engine slowly, feeling a strange calm descend over me, my mind already turning over what had to be done next. Only if this story truly resonates with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your city or country and the local time you're watching from, because this tale of family, trust, and hidden truths might speak to you personally. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 76 years old, and this was the night that changed everything in our family. I'll take you back now to where it all began, to show you the roots of this rift and the lesson you will carry through this story if you stay until the end. And now, let me tell you exactly how it started. The day had begun like any other summer morning, the scent of pine and lake water filling the air as I walked around the property. Yet something felt off, a tension in the breeze I couldn't place. Emily avoided my gaze at breakfast, barely touching her pancakes, and Ryan kept whispering into his phone, glancing at me as though I were a puzzle he didn't care to solve. "Dad, maybe just skip today," Emily finally said, her words deliberate, loaded. "I can't," I replied, voice steady but my stomach in knots. "This is Father's Day." She shook her head, frustration flashing in her eyes. "We said family only, remember?" I felt the sting of betrayal, not just from her, but from every memory of support I'd given, now seemingly discarded. I wanted to argue, to plead, to make them understand the depth of my hurt, but something inside me held back. Instead, I turned, walked to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots, the sun glaring off the lake's surface like tiny mirrors mocking my helplessness. The engine roared to life, echoing in the silent morning, a prelude to the quiet storm I was about to set into motion. As I pulled out of the driveway, Emily's voice floated after me, sharp and bitter. "You'll regret leaving, Dad." I didn't answer, but inside, a plan had already begun to form, one that they had no idea was coming. What they didn't know yet, what no one suspected, was that the decisions I'd made long before this day were about to turn everything upside down, and the truth hiding in my quiet resolve would soon be revealed in ways none of us could imagine. As I drove away from the lake house, the morning sunlight glinting off the water, memories of Emily's childhood came flooding back, each one sharper than the last. I remembered her small hands clutching mine as we walked along the pier, how she used to laugh when I pretended the fishing rod was a sword and the waves were monsters to conquer. Her first bicycle, bright red with white stripes, had been a battle to teach her balance. I could see her now, helmet slightly askew, scowling at me, frustrated after a fall. "Dad, it is not fair," she had yelled, tears streaming down her face. I knelt beside her, wiped her scraped knee with a damp cloth, and said, "It is only fair if you learn to stand back up." That lesson, one of countless others, had shaped her, and yet now it felt like she had forgotten every ounce of trust and warmth we had shared. I remembered family dinners, the smell of roasted chicken and baked potatoes filling the kitchen, and how I had carved her name into the underside of the oak dining table so she would always have a reminder of home, of where she belonged. "Walter, come try the pie," my late wife had said once. Pulling me from a moment of exhaustion, "Emily made it for you." I had smiled and taken that slice, unaware that years later, gestures of love could be so easily dismissed. The unfairness of certain moments had always been a thread in our family tapestry. I had seen it in the way Emily's brother, Samuel, always received the first choice of desserts, the bigger slice of cake, and yet she had been the one to scream at me for enforcing rules meant to teach fairness. "I do not care, Dad. He always gets the best," she had shouted one evening, her voice echoing through the small living room, and I had simply replied, "Life is about balance, Emily. Learning to be content with what you have is the real lesson." Those early lessons, the favoritism, the small injustices, had built a resilience in her, but also a streak of impatience and entitlement that now cut me deeply. I remembered the evenings spent under the maple tree in our backyard, Emily curled up with a book, and I would read aloud to her from classic American novels, stories about honor, integrity, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. "Do you think I could ever be like them, Dad?" she had asked one night, eyes wide. I had placed my hand on her shoulder, looking at the stars just beginning to pierce the twilight sky, and whispered, "You already have that strength, Emily. One day, you will understand it fully." Driving through the winding roads, the hum of the engine under me, I realized that strength had manifested in ways I had not anticipated. The lessons I had tried to instill, the patience, the attention to fairness, all had twisted into a wall separating us. I could almost hear her voice, the words she used to demand, to challenge, now echoing in my mind. "I deserve more, Dad. Why cannot you see it?" And yet, the boy who had shared his last cookie with her during a snowstorm, the girl who had danced barefoot on the dewy grass in summer mornings, these memories lingered, reminding me that love had always been the foundation, even when it had been taken for granted. A light breeze carried the scent of pine and lake water through the truck window, stirring a resolve deep within me. This history of subtle unfairness, of favoritism and childhood lessons misremembered, was not just the past. It was the soil in which the next chapter of our story would grow. I glanced at the rearview mirror, thinking of the choices that lay ahead, realizing that to change the present, I had to embrace the truths buried in these memories, the ones Emily had yet to see. And just as the horizon opened up before me, the weight of what I was about to do pressed into my chest, a quiet certainty forming that this journey, though outwardly calm, was only the beginning of revelations that would shake the very core of our family, leaving a question lingering in the air. Would she ever understand the lessons she had been given, or was this departure the first step towards something entirely new? About 3 hours after leaving the lake, I crossed into western Montana and pulled into a small diner just outside Missoula, the kind of place where the coffee was always hot and nobody asked too many questions. I took a booth by the window and stared at the mountains in the distance while a waitress named Carol topped off my cup. "Long drive?" she asked. "Long life?" I replied with a faint smile. She laughed softly and moved on. For the first time that day, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness. Not relief. Just peace. My phone buzzed twice on the table. Emily. Then Ryan. I looked at the screen and turned it face down. A year earlier, I would have answered immediately. I would have rushed to explain myself, to smooth things over, to make sure everyone else felt comfortable. But something inside me had shifted. For once, I was not chasing approval. I was not defending my existence. I was simply sitting there, drinking coffee, letting the silence speak for itself. That small decision felt larger than I could explain. As I finished breakfast, another call came through. This time it was Margaret Collins. "Walter, where are you?" she asked. "About 10 miles outside Missoula." "Good. I was hoping you had already left." Her tone caught my attention. "Why?" There was a pause. "Because I received something interesting yesterday." I sat up straighter. "What kind of interesting?" "Something I think you should see in person." An hour later, I was sitting across from her in her office. Margaret had been my attorney for nearly 15 years. She was sharp, careful, and never dramatic, which was why the look on her face worried me. She slid a folder across the desk. Before you open that, answer one question. Have you recently promised anyone ownership of the lake property? No. Have you authorized anyone to negotiate on your behalf? Absolutely not. She nodded slowly. That is what I thought. I opened the folder. Several printed documents sat inside. My eyes moved across the pages. Property estimates, financial projections, development proposals, notes, names, dates. The lake house address appeared again and again. My stomach tightened. What is this? I asked quietly. Margaret folded her hands. It appears someone has been discussing future plans for your property as if ownership was already settled. I looked up. Who? She hesitated. Then she pointed to a signature block on one page. Ryan Foster. My chest went cold. That cannot be right. I checked twice. I studied the documents. The details were specific. Too specific. Renovation plans. Estimated resale values. Potential investor interest. None of it should have existed. Nobody had permission to create these projections. Nobody. Yet there they were. Sitting in front of me. Margaret leaned forward. Walter, there is something else. She handed me another page. This one contained notes from a meeting held several months earlier. My eyes froze on a sentence halfway down the page. Future transfer expected within family. Owner unlikely to oppose. I read it again. Then again. Owner unlikely to oppose. Not owner informed. Not owner consulted. Simply unlikely to oppose. As if I were an obstacle to be managed rather than a father. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Margaret asked, "What do you want to do?" I stared out the office window toward the mountains. Years ago, I would have called Emily immediately. I would have demanded explanations. I would have started an argument that ended nowhere. But that man was gone. Instead, I took a slow breath and asked a different question. If I wanted complete control over every future decision, how quickly could we move? Margaret's expression changed. It was the first time all day I had seen a hint of approval in someone's eyes. Very quickly, she said. I nodded. Good. Then I slid the folder closed. Because for the first time, I was beginning to understand that what happened that morning was not an isolated moment of hurt. It was part of something much larger. And if the documents in front of me were only the pieces Margaret had discovered, I could not stop wondering how many more secrets were still hiding beneath the surface. Margaret and I spent the next 2 hours reviewing every page in that folder, and with each document the picture became clearer and more painful. What bothered me most was not the property projections or the financial estimates. It was how many people seemed to believe a future had already been decided without me. At one point, Margaret slid another page across the desk. Look at the meeting attendees. I scanned the names. Local investors. A lending officer. A development consultant. Then I saw a familiar name. My neighbor, Tom Jenkins. I stared at it for several seconds. Tom was there. Margaret nodded. According to these notes, my stomach sank. Tom and I had shared fishing trips, holiday barbecues, and nearly 20 years of friendship. Later that afternoon, I called him. Walter, he answered cheerfully. How are you? I need to ask you something. His tone changed immediately. What is it? Have you been discussing my property with Ryan? Silence. A long silence. Finally, he sighed. Walter, I thought you knew. I closed my eyes. Knew what? Ryan said you were preparing to step back from everything. He said the family was helping manage the transition. The words hit me harder than I expected. And you believe that? He seemed sincere. I thanked him and ended the call before my frustration took control. That conversation was only the beginning. Over the next several hours, I made 3 more calls. Each one revealed another piece of the same story. Ryan had apparently been telling people that I wanted less responsibility, that I was tired, that I preferred letting the younger generation make decisions. None of those statements were true, yet they had spread quietly from one person to another until they became accepted as fact. The most painful call came from an old family friend named Linda. She hesitated before speaking. Walter, please do not be upset. Just tell me. Emily mentioned months ago that you were struggling with stress and becoming withdrawn. My grip tightened around the phone. Withdrawn. She said she was worried about you. For a moment, I could not speak. I thought about the countless evenings I had spent alone after my wife passed away. The birthdays I attended. The graduations. The family dinners. I had shown up every time someone needed me. Yet somehow a story had formed that painted me as a man fading quietly into the background. When I ended the call, Margaret studied my face. You look like you just lost something. I stared toward the window. I think I did. The betrayal was not just the lies themselves. It was realizing how easily they had been accepted. People rarely question a story when it sounds reasonable. They simply repeat it. One conversation becomes 10. 10 become 50. Eventually, the truth struggles to compete. That evening, I checked into a small hotel near downtown Missoula. The room overlooked a busy street filled with restaurants and shops. Normally, I enjoyed watching people come and go. Tonight, I barely noticed them. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages from family members appeared one after another. Samuel asking where I was. A cousin wondering if everything was okay. Even Olivia had sent a short text. "Grandpa, please call me when you can. Something feels wrong." I read that message 3 times. Then another notification appeared. This one was different. It came from an unfamiliar number. Attached was a photograph. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it. It showed Ryan sitting across a conference table with 2 men I had never met before. In front of them sat a large blueprint of my property. Beneath the image was a single sentence. "You are seeing only half of what they planned." And in that moment, everything I thought I understood came crashing down. The following morning, I sat at the small wooden desk in my hotel room, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop. Every message I had sent to family members, every voicemail I had left, even the handwritten letter I had carefully drafted the night before, seemed to vanish into a void. I typed another email to Emily, subject line simple, "Please understand." I recounted the truths she had not known, the plans that had been hidden from her, the lies that had spread in my absence. I pressed send and waited, watching the minutes tick by. 2 hours later, not a single reply. I called Samuel, my voice tight but steady. "Samuel, please, we need to talk. There is confusion, misinformation, and I want you to hear the facts." The line clicked before I could even finish. I dialed again. No answer. By late morning, I had made 7 calls, each to a different family member. Each time, the response was the same: unanswered, ignored, or intercepted by someone else. I left another message on Emily's phone. I could hear the tremor in my own voice as I said, "I am trying to explain. I am not the person you think I am." Silence followed. Then a text arrived from Olivia, my granddaughter, only 10 words. "Grandpa, why are you not answering?" I tried to calm myself and call her back, but her mother blocked the number. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten on the counter as I stared at the notifications stacking up. 32 unread texts, 12 missed calls, 3 unread emails, all from family members attempting to reach me for clarity that I could not provide because they no longer trusted the source, only the rumor. The weight of the isolation pressed down on me. I realized that the betrayal was more systemic than I had anticipated, a web of assumptions, miscommunications, and accepted lies that had formed into a wall between me and the people I loved most. I tried one final approach, a handwritten note left at Emily's house with a neighbor I trusted, pleading for someone to read and understand. "This is my truth. Please, consider it carefully before decisions are made," I wrote, folding the paper neatly, slipping it into an envelope, and handing it over. Days passed. The messages remained unanswered. Not one call returned. Every attempt I made to clarify, to mend, to re-establish contact, was met with a void. The isolation was not just physical. It was emotional, a quiet, suffocating solitude that left me staring at the ceiling at night, listening to the wind rustle through the pines outside, wondering how words could be twisted so thoroughly that those closest to me would believe them over my own voice. The realization settled in like a heavy stone. No explanation, no evidence, no appeal to reason could penetrate the narrative that had been built around me. I was alone in a crowded world, surrounded by people who had accepted a story I had never told, and the depth of that solitude gnawed at me, leaving a quiet, aching emptiness that made the hotel room feel like the most distant place on earth, a place where even the familiar faces of friends and neighbors could not reach. And as night fell over the city, I understood that this isolation was not temporary. It was a consequence of the betrayal, the unchallenged lies, and the assumptions that had taken root while I had been away. And for the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of being unseen, unheard, and entirely alone, wondering if the connections I had built over decades had been irrevocably severed, leaving only the echo of voices that no longer answered and the knowledge that the path to reconciliation if it existed at all, would be longer and more uncertain than I had ever imagined. The days that followed felt like wading through fog, each hour stretching longer than the last. I walked through the hotel lobby, nodded politely at strangers, yet every smile, every passing glance, reminded me of the absence of familiar faces that once grounded my life. I found myself standing by the window late one afternoon, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and I realized that it had been years since anyone had truly looked at me the way they used to, the way my wife had always seen me, present, valued, essential. My mind wandered to Emily, to Ryan, to Olivia, and a pang of loss struck deep. I called Emily, hands trembling slightly, and left another message, softer this time. Emily, I am here, if you are ready. I am not gone, not absent. I love you. Please, hear me. The phone stayed silent. I tried Samuel next, then a cousin, even neighbors who had once greeted me with smiles and cups of coffee. No responses, just missed calls, unread messages, and the creeping understanding that the bonds I had relied on were fractured in ways I had never imagined. That night, I sat alone on the hotel balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the quiet streets below. The laughter and chatter I had once shared with family echoed in my memory like ghostly whispers. Grandpa, will you come watch me ride my bike? Olivia's voice in my mind was almost tangible. I will, sweetheart. I promise, I whispered to the dark air. The isolation pressed in, yet there was a subtle shift, a glimmer of recognition within me. I understood, with painful clarity, that these moments of loss, these rejections, were not only about others turning away, but also about the life I had allowed to be shaped around expectations and assumptions that were no longer mine. I had lost connection, yes, but I was beginning to see the contours of my own endurance, the quiet resilience that had carried me through decades of life. Margaret's earlier words returned to me. If you wanted complete control, how quickly could you move? That question, once abstract, now took root in my thoughts. Perhaps the solitude, the silence, the perceived abandonment were not merely punishments, but also the space in which I could reclaim clarity and agency. I thought of my late wife and the lessons she had instilled about patience, observation, and choosing actions that held weight rather than words that faded. A subtle determination grew within me, a recognition that while loss was profound, it was also the prelude to deliberate action. I began drafting a plan, outlining steps to protect what mattered, to address the manipulation, to navigate the tangled web of lies and assumptions that had isolated me. The hotel room, once stifling in its emptiness, now seemed like a vantage point, a quiet stage from which to consider every move. That night, as the lights of Missoula twinkled below, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of solitude, the ache of absence, the sting of misjudged intentions, the heartbreak of watching trust erode. But within that ache was the first flicker of something new, awareness, understanding, and the faint stirrings of a path toward reclaiming not just property, but dignity, clarity, and the chance to rebuild bridges that had been dangerously neglected. I closed my eyes and let the chill Montana air brush against my face, sensing that this low point, this deep quiet, was the necessary beginning of recovery, the moment when reflection gave way to resolve, and the next steps, though unseen, would carry the promise of change. The morning air in Missoula was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery as I stepped out of the hotel, determined to reclaim not just a piece of property, but a sense of self that had been buried under years of assumptions and manipulation. I rented a small office space downtown, a modest place with tall windows and a desk that had seen better days, but it was mine, and the emptiness of the room felt like a canvas ready for action. The first call I made was to Margaret. Margaret, I want to set up an account, secure the documents, and begin proper oversight. No shortcuts, no delays. Her voice was brisk, professional, and it made me feel the first flicker of control I had experienced in days. Over the next few hours, I organized files, re-established contacts with local contractors, and reviewed old correspondence, noting which projects had been mishandled and which could be salvaged. I spoke with an architect I had worked with decades ago. Walter, it has been a long time. Are you really taking this on yourself? I am, I said firm. I do not need anyone else to validate my decisions. He chuckled softly. Well, if anyone can navigate the mess, it is you. By mid-afternoon, the first tangible success arrived. A local investor, previously hesitant, agreed to honor existing agreements now that clarity had been established. Walter, I trust your guidance, he said, handing me a signed contract. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility shift from anxiety to accomplishment. I returned calls I had neglected in the past, explaining that from this point forward, all communication would be direct. I appreciate your patience, I told them. Let us rebuild trust step by step. That evening, I walked along the riverfront, observing the reflection of the streetlights dancing on the water. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that progress did not require applause or approval from Emily or Ryan. It required only focus, patience, and deliberate action. I called Olivia, my granddaughter, just to hear her voice. Grandpa, are you busy? She asked. Busy making things right, I replied. She laughed, a sound that reminded me of why the effort mattered. The loneliness that had pressed in so heavily days before began to lift slightly, replaced with the slow warmth of accomplishment and self-reliance. That night, I sat at the office desk, drafting a detailed plan for the next several weeks, mapping out milestones and steps to ensure that each project would be completed under my direct supervision. As I plotted, I realized that the challenges I had faced, the misunderstandings, and the betrayals had sharpened my focus rather than diminished it. The foundation I was building now was stronger, more resilient, and entirely my own. When I finally left the office, the streets quiet and the sky darkened with stars, I understood that the isolation of the previous days had been necessary. It had cleared the noise, revealed the weaknesses in past arrangements, and allowed me to construct a path forward with intention. I felt a flicker of anticipation, a sense that the work I had begun would soon yield results that were not only practical, but deeply affirming. And as I walked back to the hotel, the lights reflecting softly on the river, I sensed that the next chapter would bring visible success, recognition of effort, and a subtle, powerful reclaiming of the life I had built and always intended to protect. Weeks passed, and the small office I had taken in Missoula began to feel like a command center. Each filing cabinet, each neatly stacked folder a testament to regained control. I had placed a polished brass nameplate on the desk that read Walter Hayes, owner and principal, a subtle symbol of authority that reinforced the shift within me. Clients and investors arrived, greeted by a man who no longer hesitated, who no longer deferred decisions to appease others. I wore a tailored blazer, a crisp shirt, and a tie, not out of vanity, but as a signal to myself that I was now operating from a place of professionalism and respect for my own judgment. During a meeting with a prospective development partner, I explained the intricacies of property rights and investment potential in a calm, precise voice. We will proceed under my oversight, I said firmly, scanning the room and catching nods of agreement. One investor leaned forward. Walter, your clarity is exactly what we need. I smiled, feeling the weight of past doubts lift slightly. That evening, I walked through the building's downtown neighborhood, shaking hands with local contractors who had once seen me only as a retired property owner. It is good to see you taking the lead, one said, a smile breaking across his face. I nodded. It is time to ensure things are done properly. Even Olivia, my granddaughter, stopped by the office, dressed in her school uniform, clutching a stack of reports I had asked her to review for accuracy and completeness. Grandpa, did I do this right? She asked. Perfectly, I replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. You are learning what matters: attention to detail, responsibility, and care. Across the hall, Margaret had arranged for the final legal checks and documentation updates. She handed me the signed agreements with a quiet approval. Walter, you have created a structure that cannot be ignored. I nodded, feeling the surge of confidence, a solid recognition of both authority and competence. That night, I returned to the hotel to collect personal effects, but the walk felt different. The streets that had once seemed distant and isolating now reflected a city acknowledging my presence, my ability to act decisively. I called Emily, careful with my tone. Emily, I have finalized the agreements. Everything is properly secured. There was silence on the other end, a pause that carried weight. I see, she finally said. I did not speak further, knowing the information alone would convey the authority I had established. After hanging up, I looked at the reflection in the hotel lobby mirror, adjusted my tie, and felt a profound sense of alignment between identity and action. The months of isolation, betrayal, and careful planning had culminated in a position of strength that was unshakable not through force, but through meticulous organization, deliberate decisions, and the quiet assertion of expertise. And as I stepped outside into the cool Montana evening, the sun dipping behind the hills, I thought of the lake, of the mornings when the weight of rejection had pressed against me, and I understood that the current timeline, the present moment of control and clarity, was built on those earlier struggles, and that the path ahead was no longer shadowed by uncertainty but illuminated by deliberate mastery and regained confidence, connecting seamlessly back to the events that had set everything into motion. The following afternoon, I arrived at the hospital in downtown Missoula, the building looming against the pale blue sky like a silent sentinel, each window reflecting the quiet tension that had settled in my chest. I walked slowly through the main entrance, the polished floors echoing with the soft shuffle of nurses and the occasional beep from distant monitors. Margaret had arranged the meeting here, ensuring discretion and an environment where the gravity of the situation could be addressed without interruption. I took a seat in the waiting area, adjusting the lapel of my blazer and feeling the weight of the brass nameplate I carried in my briefcase, a subtle signal of authority and preparedness. Moments later, Emily arrived, accompanied by Ryan and a family friend I did not recognize, their faces a mixture of apprehension and defiance. They paused at the edge of the seating area, exchanging glances before Emily approached. "Walter," she said, voice steady yet uncertain, "we need to talk." I looked up slowly, letting the silence stretch between us, the tension palpable. "Yes," I replied evenly, "we do." We moved to a small conference room off the main hallway, chairs arranged around a polished wooden table, the room bathed in the soft glow of fluorescent light. Margaret joined, sliding a folder toward me. "This contains the documentation for all property and financial matters under discussion," she said. "We need clarity today." Emily glanced at Ryan, then back at me. "We thought," she began, her voice faltering slightly. I held up a hand. "Let me finish first. There has been a great deal of confusion and many assumptions made in my absence. I am here to provide clarity." Ryan shifted uneasily in his chair, the tension evident in the way he gripped the edges of the table. "We only wanted to help," he said, though the words lacked conviction. I leaned forward slightly, the quiet authority in my posture commanding attention. Help is appreciated when it is requested and informed. Assumptions, however, have consequences. Emily's eyes widened, a flicker of realization crossing her face. "I did not understand," she whispered, though even in her voice I could hear the tension building, the anticipation of truths yet to be revealed. I remained calm, measured, allowing each pause to heighten the gravity of the moment. Margaret opened a document, arranging papers neatly and pushing them toward Emily. "Walter has exercised oversight as legally and ethically required. The structures put in place are binding and enforceable. Any discussions without consent are null." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken weight. I watched as Emily's gaze darted between me, the documents, and Ryan, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the tightening of fists, the way the room seemed to shrink as the reality of oversight began to settle. "So everything we thought was going to happen," Emily murmured, "is not." Her voice faltered. I simply nodded. "That is correct. And today, you will understand why assumptions cannot replace clarity." I allowed the silence to linger, each second building, each heartbeat counting, as though the truth itself were waiting to step forward. Outside, the distant sound of a wheelchair rolling past and the faint beeping of a monitor reminded us all of the real world beyond this confrontation. Yet within the room, time had slowed, every movement deliberate, every glance charged with meaning. And just as I was about to explain the first details that would shift the balance entirely, the door opened slightly, a nurse pausing at the threshold, and the next moment, one that would reveal what had been hidden for so long, was about to arrive, the room poised at the edge of revelation, tension mounting with each measured breath, anticipation sharp as a knife. and all of us waiting for the first word that would unravel the carefully constructed assumptions. I took a slow breath and began to lay the documents across the table, each one precise, verified, and undeniable. Emily leaned forward, her fingers tracing the edges of the papers as though trying to find a flaw that did not exist. Ryan's expression remained tight, a combination of surprise and frustration that he could not mask. I spoke calmly, deliberately, choosing every word with care. "These agreements are complete," I said. "Every projection, every decision made in my absence has been invalid. The authority has always remained with me." Emily's eyes flickered, a mix of disbelief and dawning comprehension. You did all this on your own?" she asked softly. "I did," I replied. "I took the time to verify, to ensure that every step aligns with the law, the agreements, and the family's best interest. Not assumptions, not rumors. Facts." Margaret nodded, her presence steady, reinforcing the gravity of the moment. Ryan shifted in his chair, glancing at Emily before saying, "I thought we were doing what you wanted, Walter." "I was just acting on assumptions," I interrupted, voice even but sharp. "Is not the same as acting with authority. Decisions cannot be built on what you believe is convenient or likely. They must be founded on truth and transparency." Emily swallowed, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. "I never realized," she murmured. "I did not understand how much you managed, how much control you always had." I allowed the silence to linger, giving her time to absorb the reality that the man she had thought passive, uncertain, or removed was, in fact, deliberate, capable, and resolute. "Every contract," I continued, "every investment, every step moving forward, has been structured with oversight, protection, and responsibility. It is all binding, enforceable, and correct." Ryan's jaw tightened. He could not dispute the truth, could not challenge the meticulousness of the work. Emily looked at him, a flicker of guilt crossing her expression. "I see now," she said quietly. "We misjudged. We underestimated." I leaned back slightly, my hands resting calmly on the table. Underestimation can be costly. Awareness is the first step toward respect and understanding. The rest is in your actions moving forward. She nodded, her gaze steady now, the tension in her shoulders slightly easing, though the shock of realization still colored her features. I had no idea," she admitted. "I thought we knew, that we were right." I met her eyes. "You believed a story constructed without the facts. I never stopped being present. I never stopped ensuring the right course. And today, you see the truth." The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the hospital beyond the conference room walls. Even the smallest movements, the shifting of papers, the clearing of throats, seemed amplified as reality settled in. Emily's voice broke the silence again, almost in a whisper. "Walter, you are more than we imagined." I allowed a faint, measured smile, letting the acknowledgement resonate without arrogance. "I am still the same person," I said. "But now you see the choices I make, and the consequences of assuming otherwise." For a long moment, the three of them sat still, the weight of understanding settling over the table like a quiet storm. Then Ryan shifted, nodding slowly, his expression betraying recognition for the first time. The truth had arrived, and in its calm precision, it was more powerful than any argument, louder than any protest, and heavier than any threat. I leaned back, letting the silence speak, knowing that what they had believed for months was now overturned in the presence of proof, structure, and unwavering clarity. And as the room absorbed the revelation, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor passed through Emily's hands, a sign that while comprehension had arrived, the emotional impact of fully realizing the depth of what I had accomplished and what they had misjudged was only just beginning to settle, leaving a quiet shock in its wake that neither time nor words could immediately dissipate. After the documents had been laid bare on the conference table, the room settled into a quiet tension, each member of the family processing the scope of the revelation in their own way. Emily sat with her hands folded, lips pressed tightly together, staring at the brass nameplate on my briefcase, a symbol of authority she had never acknowledged before. Ryan, leaning back in his chair, attempted a casual glance toward me, but his eyes betrayed the weight of realization. Margaret, seated to my right, quietly observed, allowing the family to absorb the implications without interference. I spoke deliberately, my voice calm, yet unwavering. Every projection, every assumption, every step taken in my absence without my consent has been reviewed, corrected, and secured under the proper legal structures. There will be no deviation, no ambiguity, and no shortcuts from this point forward. Emily's shoulders dropped slightly, a mixture of resignation and dawning comprehension. I thought we understood what was happening, she said softly, almost a whisper. You believed a story built on omissions and assumptions, I replied, eyes meeting hers evenly, not on facts. Understanding now is your responsibility. Decisions must reflect truth, not what you wish to believe. Ryan shifted uneasily, clearing his throat. I did what I thought was helping. I never intended. Intent is irrelevant when actions contradict authority. I interjected, measured, and precise. What matters is clarity and oversight. That is the line I will not allow to be crossed again. Emily glanced at him, her expression revealing the first glimmers of accountability. We misjudged, she admitted. We underestimated the structure and care you had in place all along. I allowed a subtle pause, letting the words sink in, reinforcing the boundary I had established. Acknowledgement is necessary, I said, but recognition alone is not sufficient. From now on, any decisions regarding property, investments, or family agreements must be directed through me or legally designated channels. This ensures respect for process and prevents misinterpretation. A silence settled over the table, punctuated only by the distant murmur of the hospital beyond the walls and the subtle shift of papers as Margaret straightened them. Olivia, my granddaughter, who had been quietly observing from the corner, spoke softly. Grandpa, everything will be okay now, right? I nodded at her, offering a measured smile. We are restoring order, and clarity will guide our next steps. Patience is required, and responsibility must be accepted. Emily's gaze lingered on me, a complex mixture of relief and lingering guilt. Ryan looked down at the table, the tension in his jaw slowly releasing. The atmosphere had changed. Authority had been re-established, respect had been demanded without raised voices, and the family was beginning to confront the reality of the boundaries I had set. Yet beneath the calm surface, unspoken emotions remained. Regret, uncertainty, and the awareness that trust, once fractured, would take time to heal. I sensed that while some lessons had been understood, the full weight of consequences, both practical and emotional, had not yet been completely absorbed. I sat back, maintaining a quiet, controlled presence, allowing them to feel the magnitude of accountability and the firmness of established limits, knowing that the room contained both acknowledgement and tension, a balance between authority and empathy, and that the unfolding chapters of our family story would require continued clarity, patience, and the careful navigation of emotions that were far from fully reconciled. The weeks after the confrontation unfolded with a quiet rhythm, mornings filled with the steady hum of office work, evenings with the reflective glow of the Montana sunset over the river. I had returned to the lake house, now under my full oversight, and walked its familiar rooms with a calm that had been absent for months. Each step on the polished wooden floors reminded me of years of laughter, tears, and devotion, yet now there was clarity, a sense of boundaries respected and decisions made deliberately. Emily visited one afternoon, her demeanor softer, eyes tentative yet open. Grandpa, she said quietly, I think I understand now. I nodded, smiling gently. Understanding is the first step, Emily. But true growth comes from respecting both others and yourself. I had learned that my value was not defined by others' perceptions, that independence and self-respect were shields against manipulation and assumptions. In my office, the brass nameplate gleamed under the sunlight filtering through the windows, a simple symbol of authority and focus, reminding me daily that clarity and intention create strength. The property was secured, investments organized, and contacts aligned, yet the most profound change was internal, the steady, deliberate confidence that I was the author of my choices, and no one else could redefine my worth. I began mentoring Olivia, guiding her through lessons about responsibility, patience, and discernment, teaching her that trust must be earned and boundaries must be maintained. Grandpa, will I always know what is right? She asked one day, sitting cross-legged on the office rug. You will, I said softly. If you listen to your intuition, honor your values, and never let anyone decide your importance. The house itself became a symbol, a polished oak desk in the corner with a single framed photograph of the lake, representing the grounding of family, history, and lessons learned. I would often pause, placing a hand on the frame, a tactile reminder of resilience and perspective. To anyone out there who has felt the sting of betrayal, the loneliness of misunderstanding, or the weight of having your life and choices misjudged, I say this: trust in your own discernment, hold firm to your boundaries, and allow the universe to guide you toward clarity. Healing begins when you acknowledge your own power and refuse to let others dictate your worth. Thank you for listening and for allowing me to share this chapter of my life. May it remind you that even in the deepest isolation, awareness and intentional action can restore balance. My name is Walter Hayes, 76 years old, and the lesson I want to share with you is that self-respect and clarity in boundaries are the truest forms of strength. As you reflect on this story, consider the moments where you may have compromised your own clarity and think about how you might reclaim it. In the next videos, you will witness further stories of resilience and insight, offering guidance on navigating complex family dynamics and personal growth. Stay with the series to explore how intuition, deliberate choices, and quiet confidence can transform challenges into opportunities for empowerment and understanding. And know that each story will leave you with a sense of hope, practical wisdom, and renewed faith in your own journey.